superstar is about to sign a Nike endorsement deal worth $28 million.
He pisses me off when people are like, she's not the face of the league.
Who would be?
What?
$25 million. That's the number we're starting with today. And trust me, by the time this story is done, that number is going to feel like the smallest part of it. $25 million handed to a rookie who hadn't even finished her first season in the WNBA. The contract was ready. The lawyers were in the room. The whole night had already been planned out, word for word, down to the last handshake. Sign here.
Smile for the cameras.
Hold up the jersey. Say a few nice lines. Go home. A very rich young woman. That was the plan. Except she didn't follow it. In front of a packed room full of Nike executives, reporters, and her own teammates, this rookie did something nobody saw coming. She turned around. She looked straight at her teammate, Sophie Cunningham. And in that one moment, the whole room went dead silent. No clapping, no camera flashes, no cheering, because what happened next wasn't a shoe launch anymore. It wasn't a business deal. It was a statement. And by the time the night ended, it had changed the conversation around women's basketball in America forever. So stick around, because this is the story of a rookie who took $25 million of her own money and did something that had never happened before in professional sports. It's going to take a few minutes to tell it properly, but I promise you, it's worth every second. But before we get into what happened that night, we need to talk about something most casual fans don't really understand. For years, the money situation in the WNBA was honestly embarrassing. I'm not exaggerating here. I'm just telling you the truth. Veteran players who had given 10, 12, even 15 years of their lives to this league were making salaries that couldn't even cover rent in the cities they played in. For most of the league's history, the average pay was somewhere in the mid-five figures. Even the very best players in the league were maxing out around $250,000 a year. Sounds like a lot. Sure, until you compare it to the NBA, where a rookie sitting on the bench makes over $1 million in year one. So, what did these women do in the off-season? They packed their bags and got on planes. They flew to Europe. They flew to Australia. They played in Russia and China and Turkey just to make enough money to keep their basketball careers alive. Often stuck overseas away from family for months at a time. And back home, sponsorships were almost non-existent. Sneaker deals were rare. Some of the biggest names in women's basketball were literally wearing shoes designed for someone else with someone else's name on them, while the company made a fortune selling those same shoes. Only a small handful of players in WNBA history ever got their own signature sneaker. Cheryl Swoopes back in '95. Then Elena Delon, Maya Moore, Candace Parker, Sabrina Ionescu got hers in 2023. That's basically the entire list in a league that's been around since 1997. That was reality. That was the state of women's professional basketball in this country. And then in the spring of 2024, a rookie named Caitlin Clark walked into that world and blew the whole thing up almost overnight. Some reports say the number was closer to 28 million over 8 years. Most outlets landed on 25 million. Either way, it didn't just beat the old WNBA record. It completely obliterated it. To give you some perspective, Sabrina Ionescu's Nike deal was the biggest in league history before this, reportedly worth 7 figures. Caitlin's deal wasn't just bigger. It was in a whole different universe. We're talking about a number so massive that grown men in the NBA started questioning their own contracts, wondering how a rookie in the WNBA just out-earned them in endorsements after 5 years in the league. Overnight, Caitlin Clark went from a college superstar to the most valuable rookie in the history of women's basketball. She wasn't just the face of the Indiana Fever anymore. She had become the face of the league's entire commercial future. In a lot of ways, she had become the face of women's sports in America. And Nike didn't do this out of kindness.
Let's be clear about that.
This wasn't charity. This was cold, hard business math. Nike didn't sign her because she could pull up from 35 feet. They didn't sign her because she broke every scoring record in college basketball history. They signed her because every single arena she stepped into sold out weeks in advance. They signed her because TV ratings would double, sometimes triple the moment her name showed up on the schedule. They signed her because jerseys with her number on them were flying off shelves faster than the league could restock them. And most importantly, they signed her because she pulled in an entirely new audience. Young girls and women who had never watched a single WNBA game in their lives. Think about this. 2.45 million people tuned in to watch the 2024 WNBA draft. The night Caitlin got picked first overall by Indiana. The old record was around 600,000. She doubled it before she'd even played a single professional minute. That's why the number made sense. That's why this deal became historic. Nike wasn't betting on a player. They were betting on a shift. And as we now know, they bet right. For most athletes, that's the finish line. You sign the deal, you do the press tour, you let the brand build a campaign around your face, and you ride the wave for as long as it lasts. Nobody would have blamed Caitlin Clark for doing exactly that. Nobody expected more from a rookie who is still adjusting to the league, still absorbing hits every single night on the floor. But Caitlin Clark isn't most athletes. She never has been. And this is exactly why we're telling this story, because of what she did with that money next. Instead of just cashing the check and moving on, she took the biggest financial win of her career so far and used part of it to lift somebody else up. Not with a nice speech, not with a symbolic gesture, with an actual signed contract, an actual custom pair of shoes, and an actual plan that nobody in that room saw coming until it was happening right in front of them. The event was supposed to be textbook. There was a guest list, a timeline, cue cards backstage, camera angles already mapped out. Nike had even stitched together a special jersey just for the occasion, gold thread, and everything. Play the highlight reel of her journey. Hand her the jersey on stage. Let her say a few polished lines. Snap 1,000 photos. Send everyone home happy. That was the routine. Nike had run this exact playbook 100 times before. Caitlin walked in with her usual calm energy, completely locked in, completely unbothered by the lights or the noise. If you've ever watched her during warm-ups, you know exactly what I mean. 22 years old, moving like she's been doing this for 2 decades. Standing beside her was her teammate Sophie Cunningham, who figured she was just there for support. Maybe she'd end up in a background photo. Maybe Caitlin would give her a shout-out during speech. She had no idea what was coming. Nobody in that room did. The lights dimmed. The room went quiet. A video started rolling on the big screen, tracing Caitlin's whole journey. It started back in Des Moines, Iowa, where she was already drawing crowds bigger than most college programs could fill on a good night. Then her legendary run at the University of Iowa, where she rewrote the record books completely. Then her rookie year in the league, and the footage didn't hide anything. The hard fouls, the cheap shots officials somehow missed, the commentators calling her overhyped, the trolls attacking her just for getting attention, the exhaustion of carrying an entire league's television ratings on her shoulders before she'd even fully learned her own team's playbook. But the video also showed the other side, the buzzer beaters that had arenas shaking, sold-out crowds in cities that had never sold out a WNBA game before. Little girls in the stands wearing her jersey, jaws dropped, watching her like she was a superhero come to life. It showed the moment the entire league quietly realized this wasn't a trend. This wasn't a flash in the pan. This was a permanent shift in women's basketball. When the video ended, a Nike executive walked out holding that gold-stitched jersey. Everyone leaned in. Phones came out. This was the photo moment. Caitlin took the jersey, held it, stared at it a beat longer than anyone expected. Then she turned away from the executive and the cameras and faced Sophie Cunningham directly. Her voice was steady, but every word landed heavy. "This isn't just for me," she said. "This is for every woman who shows up, fights, and protects her teammate." Silence, no clapping. Nobody knew what was happening, and she wasn't finished yet. A sleek black display case rolled out from behind the curtain. Caitlin pulled out a custom shoebox, walked it straight over to Sophie, and placed it in her hands. No posing, no turning it toward the cameras. Just handed it over direct and genuine. Sophie smiled, assuming it was a nice gift. Maybe a pair of team-colored sneakers to mark the night. On its own, that would have been sweet enough. But when she opened the box, inside were custom player-only sneakers hand-stitched in Indiana Fever colors with a phrase that had defined Sophie's entire career stitched across them. "Never give up." Sophie ran her fingers over the stitching. Then she noticed something else underneath the tissue paper. A folded contract, not Caitlyn's contract. Sophie's. Caitlyn had negotiated an entirely separate Nike endorsement deal for Sophie Cunningham as part of her own massive contract. She had sat across from Nike executives during one of the biggest business negotiations in women's sports history and told them flat out she wouldn't sign unless her teammate got a deal, too. Let that sink in for a second, because this is not how professional sports usually works. Leverage in this business exists for one reason: to get more for yourself. That's what agents teach. That's what financial advisors recommend. That's the entire industry built for decades on looking out for number one. Caitlyn threw that rulebook out the window. She used her leverage to pull up another chair at a table that barely has enough seats to begin with. Sophie stood there in silence for what witnesses say was almost 30 seconds, just holding the box and the contract, trying to process what had just happened to her life. And that's when the room finally understood, and the silence broke into applause. Not the polite kind you get at a corporate event. The kind of applause that happens when people realize they just watched something they'll be telling their grandkids about. Now, you might be wondering why Sophie. Out of every player on that Fever roster, why her? If you're asking that, you haven't been watching Indiana Fever basketball this season. Because Sophie Cunningham is a huge reason Caitlyn survived her rookie year at all. I'm not saying that for a fact. I mean it literally. From game one, Caitlyn had a target on her back the size of a billboard. Not because of her talent alone, but because she was too good, too popular, too fast for a league that honestly wasn't ready for the wave she brought with her. She got hit harder than anyone else on the floor. Extra contact on picks, extra force on screens, fouls that should have been called but weren't. Remember the infamous hard foul from Chondandy Carter that made national headlines? The constant elbows, the shvees, the whistles that stayed silent far too often? That's where Sophie stepped in. She wasn't chasing endorsement deals or camera time. She was doing the dirty, thankless work that never shows up on a stat sheet. She sent a message to the entire league that cheap shots on her teammate would cost you. Anyone who came at Caitlyn verbally or physically had to go through Sophie first. She became the enforcer, the protector, the reason opposing players thought twice before targeting Caitlyn off a screen. When refs missed a call, Sophie made sure it didn't happen twice. Late in the season, she took a hard foul of her own defending Caitlyn. And afterward, she didn't apologize. She said she'd do it again. And everybody watching knew she meant every word. She wasn't doing any of this for attention. She's just always been that kind of competitor, going all the way back to her college days at Missouri and her time with the Phoenix Mercury before landing in Indiana. And Caitlyn noticed every single bit of it. She didn't say much about it publicly during the season. That's just not her style. But she was clearly paying attention and planning something behind the scenes. That's what makes this Nike moment so much bigger than a nice gesture. It wasn't a stunt cooked up in some marketing meeting. It was a player looking at the teammate who took hits for her all season long and saying, without saying it directly, "I see you, and now the whole world is going to see you too." Caitlyn said it herself that night. No teleprompter, no script. People talk about the plays that she makes, but Sophie makes the plays that nobody sees. That's not something you can fake. You can't script that kind of loyalty. You can't put a price on it. And that's exactly why Nike had a decision to make in the days that followed. Treat this as a sweet one-off story, milk it for 48 hours of social buzz, then move on to the next campaign like always, or fully lean into what had just happened and reshape the entire strategy around it. Nike had already been watching women's sports explode in real time. The 2023 NCAA championship game between Iowa and LSU pulled in nearly 10 million viewers, the most watched women's college basketball game ever, and a huge chunk of that was because of Caitlyn. By the time she got drafted in April 2024, Indiana Fever season ticket sales had jumped by over 0.000%. Road games were selling out in cities that had never sold out a WNBA game in their history. So, when Nike's marketing team looked at what happened with Sophie, they didn't see a nice moment. They saw something no ad budget on the planet could manufacture a real story. Within days, they completely reworked the entire Caitlyn Clark campaign. It was no longer about one athlete in one signature shoe. It became something rarer in sports marketing. A story about loyalty, sacrifice, and a friendship strong enough that no league, no media cycle, no amount of physical punishment could break it apart. Think about how Nike has told stories in the past. Michael Jordan was one man against the world. Kobe Bryant was pure obsession, outworking everybody in the gym alone. Serena Williams was singular greatness standing up against the entire sport. But this was different. For the first time, Nike built a major signature campaign around teamwork instead of one individual. And it worked precisely because nobody wrote it. It happened naturally on a stage in Indianapolis when a 22-year-old rookie made a choice no marketing team could have planned. The whole rollout basically wrote itself. Real footage from practices and game days. Quiet moments nobody usually catches on camera. Sophie stepping between Caitlin and hostile fans on the road. The two of them laughing together on the bus after a tough loss. Late nights after practice, just the two of them working on pick and roll chemistry before heading home. And when Nike finally released that co-branded merchandise, it sold out within hours. That's the story. A rookie handed $25 million. And instead of keeping every cent of the spotlight for herself, she built a bigger stage and pulled someone else up onto it with her. That's not just a business deal. That's leadership. That's what real teammates look like. If this story hit you the way it hit me, do me a favor and drop a like. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. We've got so many more stories like this one coming, and trust me, you're going to want to be here for them. See you in the next video.